Great returns are in luck, they're built on the floor. Operators and investors always pushing for more. From the deal sheet signed to the systems in place. Speed without precision is just running a race. Operational velocity, where execution sets the pace.
Hello and welcome to Operational Velocity. This one is a bit of a special episode because John Little occupies a very rare category. So this episode is really going back to the fundamentals of operations management, maybe a refresher of things you already know, but a refresher nonetheless. But it's also a small act of gratitude to a man who proved that the deepest ideas are the ones simple enough to survive reality. Here's to you, John. So let's get into it and talk about the man and his work. It's Cleveland, Ohio, the late 1950s. And in a classroom at Case Institute of Technology, a young professor is teaching a course on queues, or waiting lines, mathematics of waiting. His name is John Little. He's barely 30, and he already has one distinction nobody can take away from him. A few years earlier at MIT, or the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he became the first person to receive a PhD in operations research, the first one ever. And on the blackboard behind him is a formula so short it looks like a typo. L equals lambda W. Basically, it means the average number of things waiting in a system equals the rate at which they arrive, times the average time each one spends inside. Every practitioner believes it, factory planners use it, telephone engineers use it, but here's the strange part. Nobody has ever proven it. It's kind of a folk theorem or mathematical gossip, if you will. And as the story has been told in operations research circles for decades, one day a student puts up his hand and challenges him. If it's always true, professor, prove it. And so he does. In 1961, John Little published a 5-page paper in the Journal of Operations Research. 5 pages, no laboratory, no factory, no capital. And here is what nobody in the classroom could have known. Those 5 pages explain why Dell beat Compaq, why Amazon grew into a colossus while its suppliers quietly footed the bill, and why Toyota rose from near bankruptcy to conquer the global automotive market. And why 2 investors can buy nearly identical companies and one walks away with double the return. Because hidden inside that little formula is the most underrated force in business. And it's not scale, it's not technology, and it's not even talent. So before we get into the actual law that John Little came up with, maybe we'll take a step back and talk a little bit about physics. So a quick physics lesson. I promise it's the only one, and I promise it pays off. You see, in physics, velocity is displacement divided by time. How far you actually moved, divided by how long it took. And physicists are fussy about a distinction the business world completely ignores. Speed is not velocity. Speed is how fast you're moving. Velocity is how fast you're moving towards somewhere. And a good example of this is a hamster on a wheel has tremendous speed. A delivery truck has velocity. And if you think about it, most companies are full of speed. Meetings, dashboards, initiatives, launches, reorganizations, motion everywhere. But ask a harder question. How fast does a dollar of value actually move through the business? From the moment you spend it to the moment a customer pays it back. And the room will go quiet. And so today, 3 stories and 1 law. The law, which converts speed into velocity. The stories about companies that stopped competing on products and started competing on time. And in the end, we'll bring it home to anyone who owns, runs, or is thinking about buying a business. So first, the man. Because I think John Little deserves to be more famous than he is. Boston kid, studied physics at MIT, graduates in 1948, and then, before settling down, spends the better part of a year hitchhiking across America, working as a sheep ranch laborer and a car valet. I'm not making that up. It's in his official biography from the Operations Research Society. John then works as an engineer at General Electric, goes back to MIT for graduate school, and in 1955, he received the first ever doctorate in operations research under Philip Morse, the man who founded the field in the United States. Then the Army, then Case Institute in Cleveland, where a folk theorem gets turned into a law. In 1962, he returns to MIT, where he stays for the rest of a career that runs, get this, until 2017. So that's 7 decades of work. So what did he actually prove? Forget the Greek letters. Picture a copy shop. These numbers are just a simple illustration, so keep them round. At any moment, there are 10 customers inside. The baristas serve 2 customers per minute. So how long does the average customer spend in the shop? It's fairly simple. 10 customers divided by 2 per minute. It's 5 minutes. That's it. That's Little's law. The number of things in the system divided by the rate things flow through equals the time each thing spends inside. Notice that you didn't need to know where customers arrive in bursts or in a steady stream. And you didn't need to know if the queue is orderly or chaotic, whether it's first come, first served, or total anarchy. The law doesn't care. That's what Little proved in those 5 pages. It holds under astonishingly general conditions, and it's not a rule of thumb. It's actually closer to gravity. That's why I mentioned the physics analogy. Now, here's the move that turns a piece of queuing theory into an operating weapon. Rearrange it. So time in the system equals the stuff in the system divided by the rate it flows out. Operators have a name for this. The stuff in the system is called work in progress, or WIP. And the rate it flows out is the throughput. So rearrange that equation and you get cycle time equals WIP, or work in progress, divided by throughput. You can read it again because it's quietly radical. If your throughput stays the same, the only way to make things move faster is to have less stuff in the system. Not more effort, not more hustle, less stuff sitting around. And once you see it, you can't unsee it because everything in a business is basically WIP. Inventory is WIP for products, receivables is WIP for cash, an invoice is just a euro or a dollar standing in line. Projects are also WIP for decisions. Even your strategic initiatives are WIP for value creation. And this is why, 65 years later, Little's Law is quietly running everywhere. A hospital uses it to work out how many beds an emergency department needs for a given patient flow. An airport uses it to staff security lines. A software team sprint board with its column limits on work in progress. It's Little's Law with sticky notes. None of these people cite the original 1961 paper. They don't have to. The law found them the way gravity finds everyone. And if you think about it this way, inventory, invoices, and initiatives are all the same thing. It's basically value standing still. And Little's Law is the accounting of stillness. It tells you with mathematical certainty exactly how long your value is standing still and exactly what it will take to get it moving. So let's look at an example of this. It's Nagoya, Japan, the early 1950s. And Toyota is not exactly a giant at that time. It's actually a struggling manufacturer that has just come through a brush with bankruptcy in a country whose economy is in ruins. And they don't want to compete with Detroit, and they have almost none of what Detroit has. No scale, no cheap capital. American factories can afford mountains of inventory, warehouses of parts, fields of unsold cars, but Toyota can't. So if Toyota buries cash in a warehouse, that cash is gone. There is no more where it came from. So Toyota had to substitute intelligence for money. And a production manager named Taichi Ono, a man who has worked his way up from the shop floor, begins asking one question obsessively for 30 years. And years later, Ono summarized the entire Toyota production system in 2 sentences. And I want you to really hear this quote because it might be the most important thing an operator has ever said. And I quote, "All we are doing is looking at the timeline, from the moment the customer gives us an order to the point when we collect the cash. And we're reducing that timeline by reducing the non-value added waste." That's it. Not quality circles, not Kanban cards, not the 14 principles. Those are all tools. The system is one idea. There is a timeline between order and cash, and the whole job of management is to make that timeline shorter. Ono never wrote L equals lambda W on a whiteboard, as far as anybody knows. He didn't need to. Just-in-time production is Little's law lived in practice. Remember the rearrangement. Cycle time equals work in progress divided by throughput. Toyota attacked work in progress. Drain the parts, the buffers, the piles of half-finished cars, and the timeline from order to cash collapses automatically, mathematically. The less your value stands still, the faster it becomes money again. The lean movement has a beautiful metaphor for this. Inventory is a river, and problems are rocks on the riverbed. And when the water is high, you never see the rocks. Lower the water, and every rock, every defect, every unreliable machine, every broken process is suddenly exposed, and you have no choice but to fix it. High inventory doesn't just trap cash, it hides the truth. And Ono had a way of puncturing the cult of business. He liked to say that the only place where work and motion are the same thing is the zoo, where people pay to watch the animals move around. And he praised the slower but consistent tortoise over the speedy hare that races ahead and then stops to doze, because the tortoise, he said, causes less waste. So analogy for that is a factory sprinting in bursts, piling up inventory between heroic pushes. And that's hare, it has speed, but the tortoise has velocity. And let me show you the dark side of the same question. What happens when a company does the opposite? These numbers are illustrative, but every operator listening has seen this movie. A factory has 200 units of work in progress on the floor, and it ships 20 units a day. Little's law, simple. 200 divided by 20, that's 10 days of cycle time. Fine. The plant manager is under pressure to move faster, so he does the intuitive thing. He adds a weekend shift at the stamping station because stamping looks busy. But stamping was never the constraint. The painting line was. So what happens? Stamping produces more parts that pile up in front of paint. WIP rises from 200 units to 300. Shipments, still 20 a day. The paint line hasn't changed, 300 divided by 20, and that's 15 days. The factory added a shift, added cost, added overtime, and got 50% slower. Everyone is working harder, and every order now takes 5 days longer to become cash. So the factory got busier and slower at the same time. That is speed without velocity. And Little's law says it isn't bad luck, it's arithmetic. If that logic of constraints sounds familiar, it should. We went deep on bottlenecks if you look at, for example, the theory of constraints, Ellie Goldratt. And if you think about Little's law, it's the physics underneath it. So Ono's timeline is when a company turns that physics into basically a religion. Another company. In the 1990s, the PC wars, Compaq, HP, IBM, Gateway, Packard Bell, And everyone is fighting over megahertz and megabytes, shelf space, and Super Bowl ads. But in Austin, Texas, a company founded in a university dorm room decides to fight a completely different war. And Michael Dell isn't going to out-engineer anyone. He is going to outclock them. To see how, let's follow a single dollar through a traditional PC maker of that era. The dollar leaves the company when it buys components, such as chips, drives, memory. And those components essentially sit in a warehouse, and then they get assembled into a computer. The computer gets boxed and then shipped to a distributor. The distributor ships it to a retailer, and the computer sits on a shelf under fluorescent lights waiting for a customer. Eventually, someone buys it. The retailer pays the distributor pays the manufacturer, and the dollar finally comes home, months after it left. Finance has a name for that round trip. It's called the cash conversion cycle. And you can build it from three simple pieces. Days of inventory, how long the stuff sits still before it's sold. Days of receivable, how long customers take to pay you, minus days of payables, how long you take to pay your suppliers. And inventory days plus receivable days minus payable days, that's the number of days one of your dollars is trapped inside your own business. And for most companies, that number is big and positive. Cash goes out and comes back the better part of a quarter later, which means growth is expensive. Every new dollar of sales demand working capital up front, and you have to feed that machine before it feeds you. Dell did something different. They sold direct by phone and then over this new thing called the internet. No distributor, no retail shelf, and Dell doesn't build a computer until a customer has ordered it. Just think about what that does to the timeline. The customer pays on day zero by credit card before the machine even exists. The components come in and go out in days, not months. And the suppliers who provided those components, they get paid on normal industry terms, weeks later. So what ends up happening is cash comes in first, cash goes out last. Dell's cash conversion cycle doesn't shrink, it goes negative. And by the mid-2000s, Financial Commentary put the figure at roughly 40 days negative, meaning Dell collected cash from its customers about 40 days before it paid for parts inside the computers. One contemporary analysis estimated Dell ran on about 1 cent of working capital per dollar of sales, while Hewlett-Packard or HP needed roughly 18 cents and Gateway 9. And the model never really left the company's DNA. Dell's cash conversion cycle is still negative today in an industry where a typical company waits about 3 months for its money. And if you think about what the traditional channel model forced Dell's rivals to do, to sell through retail, you essentially work on forecasting demand months ahead, building machines against that forecast, and push them into the channel hoping the market behaves. And in the 90s, the market really didn't behave in the 90s PC market, where if you're stuck with warehouses of yesterday's configuration, which you have to clear with discounts that cannibalize your own new models, conversely, Dell never had to guess. Every machine is already built that had a customer's name on it. So the direct model wasn't just a sales channel, it was an informational advantage. And Dell solved the real demand signals while its competitors were working on forecast. And in the PC business, there was a second and crueler reward for velocity. Components in the 90s just didn't sit in warehouses, they melted. Chip prices fell relentlessly. Every week a processor sat on a shelf. It was worth less. And the machine built around it drifted toward obsolescence. So a competitor holding weeks of inventory wasn't just storing idle cash, it was storing ice on a warm day. And Dell, building to order with days of inventory, always shipped the freshest technology at the newest component prices, and could cut prices with a smile while rivals took write-downs. So Dell didn't win the PC wars because its computers were faster. It won because its dollars were. So Little's Law, one more time. the dollars in the system divided by the rate dollars flow through equals how long each dollar is trapped. Dell, in essence, attacked both sides. Almost no inventory in the system, ferocious flow through it until the trap inverted and the time itself started paying the company. If Dell discovered the trick, Amazon industrialized it. From its earliest days, Amazon's model had the same three-part geometry. Customers pay instantly, the card is charged when you click, inventory moves fast through the fulfillment network, and suppliers wait roughly around 60 days and beyond on negotiated terms. And the result was very similar in the sense that it was consistently negative cash conversion cycles that they achieved. And across the history of Amazon, the figure has typically run somewhere between 20 to 40 days negative. Amazon holds its customer cash for weeks before its suppliers see a cent of it. Now, here's the part of the story that I think is genuinely underappreciated. Everyone knows Amazon famously lost money for years. The standard telling is that Wall Street's patience funded the growth. But one academic analysis of Amazon's financial history found something more interesting. For roughly the company's first decade, the cash generated by its negative working capital was enough to finance essentially all of its investment. Not some of it, all of it. By that analysis, something like a fifth of everything Amazon has ever invested was financed not by shareholders and not by banks, but by the gap between when customers pay and when suppliers get paid. Make that concrete with a deliberately simple illustration. Imagine a retailer with a cash cycle of minus 30 days doing $1 million a day in sales. And on any given day, it's holding roughly $30 million of its customers' money that it hasn't paid yet out to suppliers. And that $30 million is an interest-free, permanent, self-renewing loan. And it grows automatically every time sales grows. Now scale that intuition up to a company doing hundreds of billions a year, and you begin to see why the sign of that number, plus or minus, might be the most strategic digit in a company's financial statements. So in other words, the everything store was built to a remarkable degree on other people's timelines. And notice how this changes the strategic logic of growth itself. For a normal retailer, growth consumes cash. More stores, more inventory, more receivables. Growth is a bet you have to finance. But for Amazon, growth generated cash. So every additional sell created float. And the flywheel everyone talks about, lower prices, more customers, more volume, lower costs, that flywheel had a financial bearing at its center. And that bearing was time. Amazon turned the calendar into a credit line. Toyota shorted the timeline to survive scarcity. Dell inverted the timeline to beat giants. And Amazon compounded the timeline into an empire. 3 companies, 3 eras, 1 law. So, what does this mean for you? If you own a business, run one, or searching for one to buy, start with the brutal math. And the moment you close, the clock starts. A funds hold period. 4, 5, 6 years fixes the denominator of your velocity equation. Delta T is locked. So the only variable left is delta X. How much verified value you create inside the window. And this is why IRR, or internal rate of return, is what the metric that the entire industry, private equity, lives and dies by. And it's not really a profitability measure, it's a velocity measure. A return divided by time. Take the same 2.5 times multiple on your money, earn it in 4 years, and it's roughly 26% annual return. Take 7 years, and it's about 14. Identical destination, different velocity. Wildly different outcome for whoever backed you. In this business, slow success is a form of failure. So where does an operator find velocity in an ordinary company? Let me give you two illustrations, round numbers invented for clarity, but the pattern is everywhere. First, a distributor. Say it carries $10 million of inventory and that inventory turns over every 90 days. Little's Law tells you the flow, about $110,000 of value moving through per day. Now, suppose new management tightens purchasing, kills the dead stocks, fixes the forecast, and gets to 60 days at the same sales level. 60 days times 110,000 a day is about 6.7 million. The business now needs $3.3 million less inventory forever. That cash doesn't disappear on the income statement as profit. It's better than profit. It's capital released from the calendar, available on day one to pay down debt or fund the next acquisition. Nobody sold anything extra. They just made value stand still for 30 fewer days. Second example, a services firm. Let's call it a consulting, engineering, an agency, or a software integrator. It doesn't matter. There's 40 projects in flight, 8 completed per month. So let's look at Little's Law. 5 months of cycle time per project. But here's a trap. When growth stalls, the instinct is to start more projects, which raises WIP, or work in progress. And that lengthens cycle time, which delays every invoice in the building. And the counterintuitive move is the one Toyota would recognize instantly. Cap the work in progress. Finish before you start. Cut the portfolio to 24 active projects, and if completions hold at 8 a month, cycle time drops from 5 months to 3. Same people, same payroll, every invoice lands 2 months sooner. So, stop, starting, start, finishing. And if you're on the buy side, let's say you're a searcher or an acquirer, this reframes due diligence itself. Everyone diligences the income statement. Velocity hides on the balance sheet and in the calendar. How many days of inventory? How does that compare to the 2 or 3 best operators in the niche? What are the payment terms on paper? And what's the actual days sales outstanding? Because the gap between those two numbers is pure management slack, and closing it costs almost nothing. How many improvement projects has the current owner started, and how many has he finished? A company with slow, sleeping working capital isn't a defect in the deal. Bought at the right price, it's the deal. A pile of trapped cash that Little's Law will hand you a map to start on day one. And the diagnostic for all of this costs nothing. Call it the Monday morning walk. Walk your business physically or through the numbers and interrogate everything that's standing still. That pallet in the corner, how long has it been there? That invoice, how long? That integration project, that pricing initiative, that hire you've been meaning to make. How long have you been in the system? Little's Law guarantees the answers aren't random. Stuff divided by flow. Every answer is a number, and every number is a lever. John Little died in September of 2024 at 96 years old. If you read the tributes, they call him a founder of marketing science, a pioneer of decision models, an MIT Institute professor, the highest rank they give, all true. But his monument is smaller and larger than any of that. It's 5 pages from 1961, and a law that is running right now. In every emergency room, deciding how many beds it needs, every chip fab, scheduling wafers, every drive-through, every warehouse, every sprint board, and every software team on the planet. Most of the people using it have never heard his name. That's what it means to discover something true. And if you want to know what to do with it, Ono already told you. One timeline. From the moment the customer gives you an order to the moment you collect the cash, your entire company is that line. And everything you call management either shortens it or lengthens it. So here's the thesis on this whole episode, and honestly, of this whole show. Speed is motion. Velocity is motion towards cash. Some of the best operators that we have already profiled and will continue to profile are not the busiest people in their industries. They are the people who make value sit still for the shortest possible time. Because in business, as in physics, it's not how fast you're moving, it's at how fast you're arriving. So, if this episode made you look at your own order to cash timeline a little differently, then please do two things. Follow Operational Velocity wherever you're listening so the next one lands automatically, and send this episode to one operator who has a work in progress board or receivables problem. And that's how this show grows, one operator at a time. This is Gautam Basu, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.
Great returns aren't luck, they're built on the floor. Operators and investors always pushing for more. From the deal sheet signed to the systems in place. Speed without precision is just running a race. Operational velocity, where execution sets the pace.